His mop froze midair, water dripping onto the marble floor when he saw the portrait. His lips trembled as he leaned closer, eyes filling with tears. Then he whispered, barely louder than a prayer, "Ma'am, the girl lived with me in the orphanage." Eleanor Whitmore had hosted countless charity galas in the Whitmore Foundation Hall, but this evening felt different. The chandeliers glowed softly above a crowd dressed in elegance, gathered to celebrate the unveiling of a new portrait, one that symbolized hope, resilience, and second chances. The painting showed a young woman with gentle eyes and a quiet smile, her hands folded as if she was holding onto faith itself. Eleanor stood proudly beside it, believing the story behind the portrait was complete. She had no idea that a single whisper from a janitor named Thomas Reed was about to reopen a past she thought was buried forever. Eleanor's life had been built on discipline and purpose. Raised in a modest Christian household, she learned early that faith was not just spoken on Sundays but lived every day. After losing her parents in a car accident during college, Eleanor threw herself into her studies, eventually becoming one of the most respected philanthropists in the city. The Whitmore Foundation focused on helping orphan children, funding schools, shelters, and adoption programs. Yet even as she dedicated her life to saving others, there was a quiet ache in her heart she never spoke about. The portrait on the wall was of Grace Whitmore, her adopted daughter. Grace had come into Eleanor's life 16 years earlier, a fragile 8-year-old girl with haunted eyes and a habit of flinching at raised voices. Eleanor remembered their first meeting vividly. Grace had clutched a worn-out Bible to her chest, refusing to let go, as if it were the last thing anchoring her to the world. Eleanor had seen herself in that child, lost, grieving, but still holding onto faith. She adopted Grace that very year, determined to give her a life filled with love, safety, and purpose. Grace grew into a remarkable young woman. She volunteered at shelters, spoke at churches, and inspired donors with her testimony of survival and hope. The portrait unveiled that night was painted to honor her upcoming role as the Foundation's youth ambassador. It symbolized everything Eleanor believed she had helped Grace overcome, or so she thought. When Thomas whispered his words, Eleanor turned sharply. Thomas was a quiet man in his late 30s, known for arriving early and staying late. He never spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice carried humility shaped by hardship. Eleanor had noticed him before but never truly seen him. Now his eyes were fixed on the portrait, tears streaking down his face. "What did you say?" Eleanor asked softly, careful not to draw attention from the guests. Thomas swallowed hard. "Her name wasn't Grace back then," he said. "In the orphanage she was called Lily." Eleanor's heart skipped. Grace had told her very little about her life before adoption. Records were incomplete, names changed for protection. Eleanor always believed it was kinder not to push. Yet hearing this man speak with such certainty unsettled her. "I lived with her," Thomas continued. "St. Mark's Orphanage. She used to sit by the window every night and pray. She said God would send someone for her." His voice broke. "Looks like he did." Memories flooded Thomas's mind. Cold winters with thin blankets, hunger that gnawed at their stomachs, and nights filled with fear when older boys fought over scraps of food. Lily had been smaller than the others, often sick, but she shared whatever she had. When Thomas was bullied, she stood in front of him, trembling but determined, quoting scripture she barely understood but deeply believed. They had faced many challenges together. There were days when the orphanage ran out of food, days when caregivers quit without notice, leaving children to fend for themselves. Thomas remembered one night when Lily collapsed with fever. He carried her in his arms, praying desperately, promising God he would protect her if only she survived. She did, but soon after she was adopted. Thomas never even got to say goodbye. For years, he wondered if Lily had survived the world outside those walls. He prayed for her every Sunday, asking God to keep her safe. And now, standing in this grand hall, he realized his prayers had been answered beyond anything he imagined. Eleanor felt her knees weaken as she listened. "Why didn't you come forward before?" she asked. Thomas looked down. I didn't think it was my place, and I didn't know it was her until I saw the eyes. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. She stared at old adoption papers, piecing together fragments of Grace's past. The next morning, she asked Grace to join her in the garden behind their home. Birds chirped softly as sunlight filtered through the trees. Grace, Alina said gently, do you remember the name Lily? Grace froze. The color drained from her face. For a long moment she said nothing. Then tears fell freely. I thought I left that life behind, she whispered. I was scared you wouldn't love me the same if you knew how broken I was. Alina took her hands. My love was never based on who you were, but who God created you to be. Grace confessed the memories she had buried, the hunger, the fear, and the guilt of leaving Thomas behind. She admitted that despite her success, she often felt like she didn't deserve it. The challenge she carried was not her past, but the shame attached to it. Together they prayed, and in that prayer Grace felt something lift. Alina invited Thomas to their home days later. When Grace saw him, recognition flashed instantly. They embraced, sobbing, two souls reunited by faith and time. Thomas shared how life hadn't been easy. He aged out of the system, worked odd jobs, struggled with loneliness, but never lost his faith. God carried me, he said simply. The resolution came quietly but powerfully. Alina offered Thomas a new position at the foundation, working directly with orphan children. Grace asked him to stand beside her when she spoke at events, sharing the story from the other side of survival. At the next gala, Grace addressed the crowd. This portrait isn't about success, she said. It's about God's faithfulness, about the people He places in our lives, even for a season, to help us survive until rescue comes. She looked at Thomas, then at Alina. We are not defined by where we start, but by the love we choose to carry forward. The audience rose in applause, many wiping away tears. Alina watched, her heart full. She realized that God had woven their lives together long before she ever saw that little girl clutching a Bible. And as the lights dimmed and the portrait glowed softly on the wall, one truth stood clear and unshakable. No prayer is ever forgotten, no tear wasted, and no life too broken for God to redeem.